we are live on YouTube on the Strange Oddities Podcast YouTube channel. Only on YouTube tonight because unfortunately I've been thrown in Facebook jail. I one of the lucky ones that got Facebook jail today for the first time ever. So unfortunately we cannot stream live on Facebook today. So apologies to our viewers and listeners, especially our guest tonight, because we have an awesome guest to introduce to everybody. But we're live on YouTube, and we have lots of followers and subscribers from the YouTube channel. And once again, I want to thank all you subscribers. The numbers just keep climbing and climbing. We're up to like 240 or something like that. So that's great. Thank you so much for that, guys. Guys, if there's any issues with the sound, video, please let me know. Can't exactly listen live while it's going on. If it sounds crappy, let me know and message me. There's a chat. Make a comment under the YouTube channel and I'll see it. If you have my messenger, I can get you through messenger and stuff like that. So if you have any questions for our guest tonight, guys, in the YouTube channel, you can place a comment there. I will relay the questions as best I can for our guest. You can also private message me if you have my Facebook account. Use messenger and you can shoot a question that way and I'll relay it that way as well. So guys, if you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube. Please subscribe to the show. Really appreciate it. We're live every week with unique guests and things like that. So I cover everything under the kitchen sink. And tonight's show is really special because I have a special treat for everybody, special guest that I want to introduce to our listeners and viewers of the Strange Oddities podcast, Miss Shelley Binder. She's a descendant of Leah Aks and Phillip Aks. The Titanic is such an awesome history of the world, not just where it sailed and what happened to the ship. But I was talking to Shelley a little bit before we went live, and I said, what many people don't know about is the prominent figures and the people that made the Titanic so special and what it is. Their history, what they did. There was the Guggenheims, there was the Astor, there was her family. You had the unsinkable Molly Brown and her story. There's a lot of survivors. There was a lot of death and tragedy, unfortunately, those who did not make it. But Shelley Binder is here with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and bring her in here. Shelley, thanks for coming on to the Strange Oddities podcast tonight. Welcome to the show. Again, I'm humbled that you're a guest tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate you hosting me.
Yeah, no worries. Like I was saying, I guess we can kind of the first thing we can do with our listeners and viewers, Shelley, if you don't mind, tell a little bit about yourself, your background, how you started to find out about researching your family history and their background of the Titanic, what made them, travel on the Titanic, what made them want to go there and be on the ship, and what was their journey. Maybe just start off telling a little bit about yourself and how you got, the beginning of you.
Well, I am a retired college professor and I live in Tennessee. I taught at the University of Tennessee for 26 years. And my husband and I both recently retired, and we are living in the town of Farragut, Tennessee.
Right.
But I was born and grew up in the same town in Virginia that my great-grandparents emigrated to when they came over from Europe. And that's Norfolk, Virginia. It's right on the coast of Virginia.
Mm.
And we were a very close family. And I knew my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. And I knew this story from as early as I can remember anything.
Sure.
In fact, I think my family refers to it as our claim to infamy.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. Yeah. Well, let's maybe, I guess, start with their journey. What made them say, all right, let's go on board the Titanic? Were they on did they have a special mission that it was a business pleasure? What was their story before arriving to the Titanic?
My great-grandfather and my great-grandmother were both from towns in Poland, which at the time was a part of Russia. So they were from Warsaw, Russia at the time. And that was around the turn of the century. And my great-grandfather, they did not know each other in Poland. They did not know each other until they made it to London. So my great-grandfather has an interesting story. Before I tell you his wife's interesting story.
Sure.
As a young man, his father was killed in some anti-Jewish violence in this town. He was from a town called Łódź, Lodz, but they don't pronounce the L. And that was around 1904. And he left a wife and a number of children with nothing to be able to support themselves. So my great-grandfather and his brother just turned to the west and started walking out of Europe. And the only thing that they had going for them, they were very young. My mother used to say that her grandfather was 10. And the only thing they had were their fists. They were boxers.
Oh, wow.
And they were very big and very strong. And they boxed each other. They boxed other people for money. And it took 1.5 years to make it across Europe to Hamburg, Germany. And then he got a ship over to England and started earning the money again, because his ambition was to be in cars. Cars were a new thing. They were big. And he wanted to go to the United States. He wouldn't settle for any other place. And he was determined to do it. And he had already been through quite a lot. So in 1908, he got on a ship, finally earned enough money with his brother Abraham, and they came over to the United States. But he had caught the chicken pox on the journey over.
Oh,
so
man.
when he got to Ellis Island, they let his brother in, but they turned him away. And they sent him right back. After all of that, they put him right back on the same ship and sent him back to London, England. And then it's probably a good thing, because in 1909, he met and married my great-grandmother. And he decided to come over again in 1911, September of 1911, which he did on a ship called the Haverford. And this time he made it, but he didn't go from Southampton to New York. He went from Liverpool to Philadelphia. And so he got in, and eventually he made a home in my hometown, which is Norfolk, Virginia, and started earning enough money to send money so his wife could join him, his wife and his new baby. So finally, they wanted to come, but there was also something I don't think we spoke about, but there was a coal shortage. So a lot of ships were consolidating their passengers, and travel on steamships at that time, and this is now 1912, right around that period, there was a coal strike and there was very little coal. So a lot of things conspired, but her family, she was the only girl in the family. Her family really didn't want her to go to emigrate. But there's also the story in the family that if she agreed to wait 3 more months, that they would make up the cost of the ticket and they would send her over on the safest ship ever built. So that's what she did. And then April 10th, 1912, they took the boat train, which loaded from Waterloo Station. If anybody's ridden on the Underground in and they went to Southampton and boarded the Titanic. And she was 18 years old, and the baby was 10 months old. There's a lot of misinformation about my family, and one of those things is her actual age.
Mm.
I think she might have just said 21 because maybe, being an 18-year-old mother of an almost 1-year-old was, I don't know, something she didn't want to have the stigma of. So but she was 18. She was born in March of 1894. And my great uncle, the baby, the Titanic baby, my Uncle Phil, was 10 months old. He had been born in June of 1911.
Wow. That's such a great story. It really, like, I mean, unfortunate what they experienced on the ship, but that their family journey to arriving to the Titanic. There were a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, there were quite a few babies on board the Titanic, and there were orphans, I believe, as well. So it wasn't just like full of adults traveling, first class, and you had all different types of families on the ship.
Right, exactly. So the first class was a fewer number of people for sure, but it was incredibly luxurious and well appointed. And of course, this was, very much touted, as it was at the time, the largest moving object in the world. It was also touted as, the millionaires kind of wanted to go on its maiden voyage because it had this first class section that was really beautiful, and they were really catered to in every conceivable way. And then there was a second class, and the second class was mostly business people traveling to Europe.
Okay.
Some other families emigrating, but a lot of business travel and so forth. And the third class, which was the biggest number of people, was set up for people to emigrate. So there was a big push in this country for people to immigrate. They wanted people to immigrate, and this time between 1890 and 1923, I think they stopped that. So there were quite a number of these great steamships that had a very large third class section. And another reason why potentially her parents wanted her to wait was because third class on the Titanic was touted to be similar to second class on other ships. It was that nice. And so it was not fully booked, though. That's interesting to me.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, it was not fully booked. And so when she got there, she was supposed to be in a cabin with 4 berths, which she was, but her and the baby were the only ones in the cabin. So she was happy about that. And she talks about in her accounts just loving it. I mean, she was very sheltered. First time away from home. She was emigrating to a continent she had never stepped foot on. Because, of course, it was my great-grandfather's dream to come to be an American, and he wouldn't take for an answer. And so she was, must have been almost high as a kite. She was on this beautiful ship, and she was emigrating, coming to a continent she had never seen.
Sure.
And the only person she knew on this continent was one person, her slightly older husband. So it was very exciting. And she talked about, I don't know if I'm sure several people in your audience saw the 1997 Cameron film.
Right.
and they depicted a big party in third
Hmm.
class. Well, that was actually a historically true thing that happened. There
It
were,
was. Oh wow.
yeah,
That's
it,
cool.
yep. She, in her newspaper accounts, talks about being at the party
Oh wow.
and how incredibly exciting it was. And there were, of course, she was in third class, so she was with a lot of other young women traveling alone with their babies.
Mm.
They were coming after their husbands, so the husbands would go first in order to set up a home, and then the women and the children would follow later. So they were, I think she was having the time of her life. She was eating food she had never eaten. She was, free to do as she pleased, and she was with all these other women and children, and I think she was having the time of her life
Yeah, sure.
until she wasn't.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then of course the story of obviously what happened to them, and does she account like as to how long was she on board until the time that things started to occur? So, because from my understanding, um, it didn't happen like super fast, but it was like kind of like a slow progression, so to speak, because of the way the ship was struck and how the water was filling the ship. And so I think, as far as historical information, as far as that goes, I think is pretty accurate of what's out of the information that's available out there. So,
Uh, well, at 11:40 on Sunday night, so she had been on the Titanic for 4 days
okay,
and traveling. So they were pretty much in the middle of the North Atlantic,
okay,
and there was a very warm spring. It was a couple of things were just very unusual. First of all, the coal shortage, which
hmm,
shifted people around in terms of what ships they had planned to go on. And then it was an extremely warm spring, and there were an unparalleled number of icebergs and ice that year.
right,
And so, knowing that, the captain decided to take the southern route to avoid that, to try and avoid it. He was trying to not have to deal with that.
yeah, sure,
So uh, at 11:40, what happened was they saw the iceberg, and the captain actually wasn't even on the bridge. He was in his cabin, but Officer Murdoch was at the in the wheelhouse. He was the officer on duty.
okay. So he was a real person.
Yes, yeah,
Enough. Okay,
real person.
yeah,
No, I'm really glad you're asking me these questions because, the movie was fairly accurate in some ways, in
sure,
some of the details. And yes, Officer Murdoch was the man who
mhm,
had to get the message from the two lookouts, iceberg dead ahead, and make a decision, looking out there. Okay, am I going to try to miss it to the left? Am I going to try to miss it to the
yeah,
right? Am I
yeah.
going to ram it? What am I going to do?
Right. And
Um,
the other thing, I don't know if you would know anything about how much coal they had on board their ship either, but like you said, with the coal shortage, I'm not sure how much they were prepared to use, because I know that yeah, they had to react quickly, and they were informing the chamber of the things that run the ship, and they were yelling down there, let's hurry as fast as we can to try to steer it out of the way, and I just think it was just too late by that time.
yeah, they had about 37 seconds to have the ship make successfully turn uh, to miss the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
It very, very nearly accomplished that.
Yeah.
Some really good historians have estimated that if they had had 5 more seconds,
Mm.
it would have totally missed it.
Wow. I know, because like, yeah, even in the movie, like they made it look that close, and if they just had like a little bit more space, they would have not hit it.
Well, it was, there were a couple of really freaky, unparalleled things beside the fact that there was the coal shortage,
Right.
besides the fact that there was um, a lot of icebergs, unusual quantity of icebergs. There was also a very strange atmospheric event that night that created something that made it seem to have a false horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So things didn't really appear on the bridge as they actually were in
Wow.
terms of the horizon. It
Yeah,
was
that's
also,
really. No, I'm just gonna say that's really interesting.
yes, I mean, there were, I know that, paranormal events and all of that is right up your alley, but
Yeah, like Northern Lights kind of thing, and
well, it wasn't really the Northern Lights. It's a phenomenon that has to do with weather, actually.
okay, okay.
And it has to do with, I'm not exactly sure, but it's a phenomenon that is well documented,
Mm.
and it makes, as I said, a kind of false horizon. So it's very difficult to accurately, see things properly. And then you factor on top of that that there was no moon. And the reason that that's important is because the lookouts used the moonlight to see it
Navigation, right?
shining on the phosphorescence at the base of the or the waves lapping on the icebergs. Well, there was no moon to do that.
Oh wow.
So it was just really a very, very strange night, very
Mm.
unusual.
Yeah.
And everything conspired to make this really unfortunate set of circumstances. Then the next unfortunate circumstance, which I don't know that it could have been anticipated, really.
Yeah.
It had never happened. They had put a lot of new engineering in this ship, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it had these watertight containment systems, and the watertight doors were shut immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But they were designed so that if you hit something head on, for instance, and it crushed one or two or three of these compartments, the ship could stay afloat.
Mm.
Uh, but what happened was so unprecedented because either the iceberg had a submerged spur,
Mm.
maybe the ship either ran over or it cut along the side, and it
Okay.
would have been fine, except it cut into one additional watertight container that completely ruined the engineering of it. If it had been four, the ship would have lived,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. And so
Right.
basically, the area that was torn open, it wasn't really torn open, as the plates were kind of pushed apart,
Mm-hmm.
was maybe described as the size of a refrigerator.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Crazy. That's just crazy.
there are so many crazy things about
Yeah.
the night. It's a
Yeah.
very weird, special night.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like you said, it was like once I get like phenomena after phenomena that just like, transpired one right after the other, and had all these crazy effects. How it affected other things that occurred, and one really great question I always had about is the the rescue boats that they had on the ships. Is it true that it didn't really have enough room or the right amount to save everybody, or like were there not enough rescue boats on the ship for them, or?
Well, interestingly, the people that decided how many of the lifeboats that were required
Right.
was the British Board of Trade.
Okay.
And at the time, it was assessed that the Titanic needed 16 lifeboats. And the reason for that is because they're not really anticipating that every single passenger on the ship will get into one of those boats
Mm-hmm.
and float around until they're picked up.
Right.
They're meant as ferries to ferry people from a sinking ship to a ship that's rescuing
Mm-hmm.
nearby.
Right.
So there's never, at that time, there wasn't really a requirement to have ships for every single person because it was thought that these were just ferries
Sure.
to take them. And also, the White Star Line, just out of uh, good judgment, put
Mm-hmm.
extra lifeboats on. So they actually had the 16 that were required by the Board of Trade, and then they had 4 additional ones that they put on that were collapsible that they just decided to put on their own.
Okay. That makes sense. And then like what I think there's a lot of misguided information too about how many people were on board because, like you said, not all the cabins were filled. There's a lot of misinformation about how many didn't survive or those that did survive. I actually have a count here. I actually did a little research myself to make do some fact checking into the numbers a little bit, but
Okay.
But if this is accurate information, of course, I'm going by the info that I have here because there's a historic Titanic page that I'm on, and it has like everything Titanic on it. But not everybody's always accurate and right. So, but they're saying that there were generally around, well, they quote unquote say approximately 2,200 passengers and crew members, and some 1,500 people perished. And then they're saying that around 705 people actually survived. Is that accurate or?
Well, they know now from studies that were done. Those numbers came from the British Titanic inquiry in 1912, and that was, they didn't really have the full story. And of course,
Mhm.
a lot of people were emigrating from countries. Their names were, very difficult,
Sure.
and that unfortunately the numbers from that inquiry and then
Mhm.
subsequently the congressional hearings, um, they're all different. But in later years, really excellent researchers have matched every person on the ship to either being a survivor or someone who died. And so the numbers that I go by are the most current research, and that is there was 2,208 people aboard,
Mhm.
both passengers and crew.
Mhm.
There was 1,496 people who died,
Mm.
sadly, and 712 people who survived.
Wow, that's crazy. A
Mhm.
lot of people, just too many. Yeah, do the math. But those who are tuning in late, I always throw this in here because we're already wow, half hour into the interview. We've been talking with Miss Shelley Binder. She is a direct descendant of Leah and Phillip Aks. They were survivors of the Titanic, the tragic Titanic incident that happened many years ago. We're learning a lot here because I didn't realize like how true or accurate James Cameron's movie actually was, and coming from Shelley herself, saying that some of the details were actually pretty close, and I think that's really cool that they tried to depict that kind of detail because I think the details are important because that's what everybody remembers of actually those who were on the ship.
Well, I will say that the fictional storyline about Jack and Rose, that was fiction.
Sure. Yeah.
And there, James Cameron is a Titaniac.
Oh, sure.
He did a lot of research, and he also used research that was already fairly accurate. And he used a lot of the research that was from Walter Lord. And Walter Lord was the man in 1950s who made probably one of the biggest Titanic movies that was released in 1958, called A Night to Remember. It was first a book, and then it was a movie. But Walter Lord is the first person to do primary source research, serious research. And also he interviewed 85 survivors, including my grandmother, and he got the story right from the survivors. And that was in, the 40s and the 50s. And he formed relationships with them. So they liked him. And so now, are there things that Walter Lord either didn't get right or may have not had the information that we now have? Yes.
Sure.
So obviously we've learned a lot since 1958, but he still had excellent research, and he made every attempt to really go to primary sources. So I actually visited, he donated his papers to the London Maritime Museum, and I went to visit his and researched in his papers, and I was really impressed with the quality of his research.
Yeah, that's great. I can't imagine all the interviews that he did with all those people were just, I would be in my glory being an interviewer myself. I'd be sitting there going, wow. But yeah, absolutely, 100%. Now, Phillip Aks was, like you said, he was 10, right?
No, he's 10 months old.
10 months old. So so he was like way too young to remember any of this, because they always say, like, when you're a baby, do you remember anything? No, not really. It's kind of hard to, like, go back that far. But do you think maybe, like, possibly mentally it could have affected him somehow as a baby and then growing up, or like not really? Did it not affect him? Or
I don't see how it couldn't have. And that is because my great-grandmother, in the end, only got off the Titanic because she had to fight for her life.
Yeah.
They were stuck in third class, and the lifeboats were 1, 2, 3 decks above them. They had no access to get into the lifeboats, and the stairs were blocked. And the way she got up was she had to, some young men jumped down deck by deck and carried these women and children up using a human ladder. But she also said that many of the women just sat there on the deck and just accepted their fate.
Oh, wow.
And even if she had taken this very risky trip of going up the back of the deck houses, there was, it was already late. There was no saying she would have even gotten a seat in a lifeboat. And as it was, what happened was they lifted her man to man from C deck up to B deck, and then B deck to A deck. And I think what happened was, this was very late in the sinking. This was maybe 1:50, so 10 minutes to 2, and the ship sank at 2:40. So, sorry, 2:20. And so things were extremely desperate when she started getting up there. And there were men who were literally throwing women and throwing babies into lifeboats.
Wow.
Because they couldn't, At the end, on the port side, the ship was tilted over. And as a result, the lifeboats were swung away from the deck. And so instead of stepping in, you had to jump maybe a meter into a lifeboat 70 feet in the air, and it was pitch black and 27 degrees. And they couldn't make themselves do it. And so, these crewmen just selflessly were trying anything they could to get these people in. So the way my uncle got separated from his mother is that I think someone took the baby when she got up to the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these men just took him and threw him into a lifeboat to help her, right?
Oh, right.
Well, out of the corner of her eye, she couldn't see the lifeboat because it was swinging out and down from her vantage point. So what she thought she saw was somebody throwing him into the sea.
Oh, wow.
Throwing him overboard.
That's crazy.
You were asking, could this have affected him? Well, my great-grandmother was horribly affected. Seriously, horribly affected.
Yeah.
And by her own admission, she was on Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not in 1941, his radio show. By her own in her own voice, you can hear her say that for 10 months she was in and out of a hospital suffering from a nervous collapse.
Wow.
So yes, it affected him because his mother was not okay. So even if he didn't actually remember it,
right,
if you have a parent that's that's seriously undermined and seriously having problems, and keep in mind his father was working hand to mouth. So and what happened after 10 months, my grandmother was born.
Wow.
Yeah. So yes, it affected all of those children. It had. I don't see how it couldn't have.
Yeah, no,
she was devastated from it. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, to experience that, the aftermath and the years of her, breaking down and, having the trips and visitations to the hospital and seeing her, being separated from him and, taking care of her in that aspect. Yeah. Wow. My heart goes out. It does. I don't know them, but I feel it, just from how you share all that with us, and really my heart, I feel for your family.
Thank you. I appreciate it. She had also lost some of her hearing, a lot of her hearing, from the extreme cold in the lifeboats floating around in the North Atlantic, and the air temperature was in the 20s, and so was the water. So
I was going to ask how cold the water actually was.
It was about the same as the air, and the only reason it wasn't frozen, of course, was because it was salt water. But that's really, when you think about it, those lifeboats only being used for kind of like a ferry to go from one let's say impaired ship to another ship.
Yeah.
They were not meant to float in the open North Atlantic Ocean, small rowboats, open wooden. They were not meant to do that. And it had to have, it was very calm that night. It was freakishly calm. That was another freakish thing. So as calm as it had been when the ship was sinking, eventually as they were floating around, not knowing because they had no idea if anybody knew they were in there.
Right.
They thought, maybe they'd float around until they all died or froze to death or starved to death.
Yeah.
They had no idea that anyone was steaming to their rescue.
Right. How long was, speaking of the rescue, the ship that came to rescue them, the ones that heard the Mayday, they used Morse code with the Mayday, if I remember.
Yes.
Back in that time period. How long did it take the rescue ship to actually arrive from the time that it was going completely under to the time that it got to the incident?
That's another part of the most amazing story,
Right.
that the wireless operator on the Carpathia
Hmm.
was notified after midnight. Well, his shift was over at midnight, but he was kind of into it. He was kind of just sitting there listening. He wasn't really working anymore. And luckily he was, because after his shift was over and he didn't have to be on the wireless anymore, he heard a call about the Titanic sinking. And he knew it was real because he knew the operators, the Marconi operators on the Titanic. The Marconi operators were hired by the Marconi company. So they
Mm.
were not part of the White Star Line or the Cunard Line.
Okay.
And so these men knew each other. And so he knew this was for real.
Mm.
And so he busted in to Captain Rostron, the captain of the Carpathia, his cabin at about 12:15 at night, and woke him up. And he just busted in. I think it's funny that Captain Rostron said something like, um, who is this chicken bugger who,
Mm.
has audacity to wake me up like this?
Yeah.
He said, the Titanic is sinking. They notified me. And he said, I want you to go and make sure of this. And so contact them again. And, do you know these men? Yes. Do you believe it? Yes. So he sent Harold Cotton back up to verify this information. But in the meantime, he got dressed, he went to the bridge, and he turned the ship around.
Wow.
And he was in a much smaller ship um, that was slower. It was a nice steamship, the Carpathia, but it was much, much smaller than the Titanic, exponentially smaller. And it normally went, or, certainly not in a sea full of icebergs, would go
Mhm.
14 knots or
Right.
15
Right.
knots. But he got that ship up to 17 knots.
Mm.
And everything he did, I have my own YouTube channel called Shelley Binder,
Yeah.
Titanic Descendant.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that because I recently interviewed an expert on Captain Rostron.
Oh wow. Cool.
Yeah, it was so cool because she was telling me uh, all of these details of this, amazing journey that he took to rescue the Titanic survivors. And he was the only one who did.
Oh wow. See, if James Cameron is listening or watching this right now with Shelley Binder, they need to make a sequel about all these like amazing stories of what took place like outside of the Titanic tragedy and all the amazing heroes and people involved that helped everybody reunite with everyone, with their families and the rescuers that came, the Carpathia, and the story you just shared. Um, like they need to do it right.
Well,
Yeah.
I I think that they should make a story in my last YouTube video that I made talking to this expert about the Carpathia, because it's such an amazing story. It's nothing about the story of the Titanic or the Carpathia is believable.
Okay.
What I usually say is if I wrote the story and I sent it
Yeah.
to a publisher and I said, this is fiction, historical fiction, and I want to publish it, they would
Yeah.
probably read it and say, well, it's an interesting story, but you have way too much in it and it's unbelievable. And so no one will buy it because it's completely unbelievable. You need to take half of it out, and then I think it would make okay story. The
That's
thing
true.
is, it's all true. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's there's so much more to it. Like for instance, as calm as it had been, which is extremely rare for the North Atlantic,
Yeah.
once they got onto the Carpathia, all hell broke loose. It was storming, it was raining, there was fog. He had to continually blow the foghorn, which is very traumatizing to these people who are so traumatized.
Yeah.
And one thing that was very traumatic to my great grandmother, she didn't know her baby had survived until 3 or 4 days after she got onto the Carpathia.
That's what actually going to be my very next question. When did they actually reunite?
This is just such a crazy story, Matt. I mean, honestly, she was absolutely morose. I mean, she had
Sure.
taken a mattress. She, had lost her baby. She had gone from this incredible high of emigrating in this beautiful ship and all of this excitement to the depths of, sorrow and horror. And so she just was on a mattress, wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, wouldn't do anything. And so they got her finally after the weather broke to try to get some air. So they went up on deck and they were just walking, and she just kind of like a zombie. And out of the corner of her eye, she sees a baby reaching for her.
Oh,
And he knew that was his mother, and he's still breastfeeding. And she looks over and she said, "That's my baby."
oh,
And
wow.
the woman that was holding him was Italian, didn't speak very much English. And she said, "No, it isn't." So they had to appeal to Captain Rostron himself.
Oh, wow.
So they took both women and the baby up to Captain Rostron's cabin, where all of the officers and a lot of the passengers of the Carpathia had vacated their cabins and given them to the Titanic's survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the officers had given their cabins to first class ladies. So in the cabin at the time was Madeline Astor, Marion Thayer, and Eleanor Widener. Now, you mentioned a lot of famous people, but there was also other incredibly wealthy people that ran railroads,
Mm-hmm.
and steel.
Yep.
And so these were three of the richest women, and now all three widows, and they were staying in Captain Rostron's cabin, witnessing him playing out from the Bible the scene with Solomon.
Mm.
Whose baby is this? And she described some things on the baby, and she got her baby back.
Oh, wow.
And she talks about how this one woman gave her a shawl and another gave her a $5 gold piece.
Wow, that's crazy. Like, I just, yeah, I can't imagine, like, yeah, just the way you described her being on the mattress and being so distraught because here she's thinking she lost her baby, and and then to have to go through it trying to identify that you're the mother of the baby through these people that you don't know, and to go through that even after that is just like I can't imagine. Just what a story. Just crazy.
Well,
Yeah, I'm glad.
pretty
I'm glad.
amazing.
I'm glad that you could share that with us on the Strange Oddities podcast. I really am.
Well, is there any other the name of your podcast, Strange Oddities, that's all this story is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like this is just like a little bit of it, and I can't imagine like if you add your whole family history and the research that you've done yourself, and you throw that in there with all the other 700 people that survived and all their descendants and all their research and all their stories that they have of reuniting with their families and what they went through and their experiences and what their traumatic experience and events were that very night, along with the aftermath? Because that's going to be my next question for you: is what was the journey after the Titanic incident for you guys? What happened to them after? Like, what'd she do? Um, you know, how did she get her life back together? Like, was there um, big events that happened that helped her to, get over what happened? Because I can't, again, like you said a little bit before you got into it, how, she did have visits to the hospital because it affected her greatly. And so, what did she do up to that point? What was her life like after that?
Well, her husband was a tailor
Hmm.
in the early days, and
Okay.
I'm sure they lived in a tenement. And I think she had a real difficult time for those 10 months, as she describes it, just kind of getting a hold of her emotions, just being able to sleep and control herself, really.
Yeah.
Just probably terrible anxiety. And what happened after 10 months is, I'll show your listeners, uh, that is that picture, baby picture, is what happened after 10 months.
Oh wow.
That was that's a picture of my grandmother.
Oh.
So 10 months, no, 11 months after my grandmother was born, almost to the day, 11 months after the accident. And so, she then had, um, a new baby. Of course, they were very close, I think. And then in 1915, she had her third and last baby, which my Uncle Harry,
Mm.
who, it's a time for another podcast, but my Uncle Harry was a war hero in
Nice.
World War II, who actually was in Guadalcanal and was on the USS Elliott that wasn't torpedoed. It was dive bombed by a kamikaze. It sunk
Oh
in
wow.
Guadalcanal. This was her son, her third son.
Wow.
So yeah,
Well, we'll have to do a second part interview. How's that?
good. I mean,
Yeah.
because I have a lot of strange oddities in my family. But anyway, so my grandmother was born, and then her son, and eventually my great grandfather finally made it to do what he always wanted to do, which is to get into automobiles. And he started a business called Sam Aks Auto Parts. And
Nice.
that survived. I mean, I remember as a kid going, it was basically a couple different businesses. Um, it was a junkyard, and it was an auto parts dealer, and they were mechanics. And he also later did salvage work. Of course, we lived right on the coast of Virginia, so there was a lot of ship salvaging and um, a lot of exciting things that they did. They were very generous. They were always working for charities, and I found so many wonderful things in the newspaper about all of their activities. Uh,
Nice.
but he was really a local hero in my hometown. He was
Nice.
very charming. He, as I said, he was into. He was 6'3", and he was a boxer. He was very strong, and I think he might have still done a little boxing. Um, I remember my great grandfather and my grandfather were babysitting my sister and I, and they took us to a wrestling match in this theater called the Center Theater with, smoke, cigar smoke. And I remember the smell and, the fighting and everything. And uh, he was quite a character. He was a very interesting, very charming person. And I'm sure she had her hands full with him.
Hmm.
But he was into all kinds of stuff. I mean, he was also like a part-time jeweler,
Oh
and
wow.
but I think it was a real love match. I think they ended up having a very good life. And So it's a happy ending. As bad as it was for her, and it really, really was, and I'm sure my great uncle was affected by it. To be honest with you, I'm sure my grandmother or my great other uncle was affected by it. You
Sure.
can't not be.
Yeah.
Um, so, she, after about 10, let's see, yeah, 11 years, she got on back on a steamboat. This is, you talk about a freaky thing, strange oddity. Got back on a steamboat called the Majestic, and she went to London to attend a wedding of her sister-in-law, whose name was Rose Aks, who was marrying a man named Jack Kosky.
Oh my God! Holy cow!
The first time she got back on a steamship was to attend the wedding of Jack and Rose.
Wow. I
Yeah.
wonder if that's where James Cameron got those names from.
Oh, I wish, but talk to Cameron if he's out there, because I have a movie to pitch about the Carpathia. So, and my family, because yeah, it's a very interesting family, and I think she eventually got some distance from it, and she had some fun with it. She went on Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not radio
Nice.
show, and she got to go to New York for the
Yeah.
premiere of the Titanic movie in 1953, and
Cool.
a publicity picture with her and the film actress Thelma Ritter, and I think she, eventually they were okay, but
Yeah.
it took a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm like much respect for her to even get back on a ship after going through all that, and for her to travel again on a big ship and oversee, go to a wedding, and like that itself was probably a huge step for her.
I'm sure. And she took my grandmother, who was 9, and I
Yeah.
actually have a picture of my grandmother on the deck of the ship they took back, called the Leviathan. Um, and then in 1938, she went over and back on the Queen Mary,
Oh
which I
wow.
visited. It's the only steamship of the time period that still exists. It's a hotel attraction in Long Beach,
Yep.
California.
Yep. It's
Yeah.
very actually very known haunted location actually. Yep.
Ooh.
Yep. And
Okay.
a lot of my friends, the paranormal, they have done excursions over there, and they've done research and events they do with the public there, and yeah, so they're all about promoting their little ghost gig there.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
it doesn't surprise me. Uh,
yeah.
and then in 1951, she was on the Queen Elizabeth.
Oh wow, cool.
So she
She
got
got
her together.
around.
Yeah, she got herself together, and she went on with her life, and she had a really good life.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's great. And what if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't be able to share these things with the world, and with everybody, especially here on Strange Oddities podcast and our viewers and listeners. And I am just like so amazed at what you shared even tonight. And like I said to our listeners, this is just a little bit. Like we only have a podcast for like an hour or so, and if I could have a podcast that runs like 3 to 5 hours long, I would have her go 3 to 5 hours long. But we'd have to have bathroom breaks in between because that's a long show. But yeah, because I can't imagine like how much more stories your family has and whatnot. Um, One quick question is, because I know a lot of Titanic historians like Craig Sulpin and a lot of the survivors, the descendants that still do events to this day that speak about that tragic event. Does your family still have like any kind of relics that you've kept over the years, or just mainly memories and pictures, or?
The things that we had were donated to the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia.
Okay.
And that was a scarf that we
Hmm.
think came from Madeline Astor, as I referenced it,
Okay.
and a blanket. I believe it was from the Carpathia. And so all of that was donated.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I can see that. Helping out museums and whatnot. So, wow. Well, before I forget, which I don't want to forget, toward the bottom of the show, I want to make sure I leave enough room for Miss Shelley Binder to promote anything that's in the works that you have going on. If there's any event, any social media or website information that you would like to share with our viewers and listeners of where they can find and learn more about Miss Shelley Binder and the things that you're attached to, go ahead. You got the floor.
Okay, well, I guess the thing that I've been working on is a YouTube channel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my name, Shelley Binder, Titanic Descendant. And I've done interviews with, as a descendant, I'm really blessed to have access to Titanic historians who are really eager to help us. So I've interviewed Bill Wormstead,
Nice,
who is one of the authors on one of the most famous Titanic books called On a Sea of Glass.
nice.
Which is, I would like to promote that book because it's absolutely amazing. If anybody wants to read one book about the Titanic, I highly recommend that book. It goes into the time period, how it was built, where it was built, and all of the specs of the ship. And when it gets to telling the story, it does it by way of firsthand accounts, and it does it uh, hour by hour. So it is really a wonderful book. And I've also researched Don Lynch, and anyone who's into Titanic knows Don Lynch. He is the one who was involved in um, Titanic, um, Mysteries of the Deep, or Mysteries of the Abyss.
Okay, yeah.
Has another wonderful book. And then just this past week, I interviewed the expert on the Carpathian, also Captain Rostron.
Mm-hmm.
I also did a tribute to my great grandparents in talking about inherited trauma,
Mm.
which is called epigenetic trauma. You were speaking of trauma, which I was really actually surprised and grateful that you brought up.
Yeah,
So I think that there is inherited trauma.
sure.
And so that one I think is really interesting. That's a short one, but it kind of goes into epigenetic trauma a little bit. And so I have a secondary interest that I have is just in steamships.
Mm.
So I also interviewed a man named Mike Poirier, who was one of the authors of another book about the steamships during the First World War called Into the Danger Zone.
Hmm.
Also, excellent book. So I have a lot of interviews on there. And
Nice.
interspersed, I talk about my family and different topics. And so, yeah, I mean, if anybody goes there and watches, I hope you subscribe and
Yeah,
like. And I
please.
especially like leave some questions there, because if you leave questions, I will answer them.
Yes. Yeah, we unfortunately I was in Facebook jail today, so I wasn't able to have all my Facebook people here to ask. They usually ask lots of questions and whatnot, but if anybody has questions after the show, maybe I can, shoot them over to your email or messenger, and you know
Yeah.
I can relay them back that way. For
Okay.
anybody who missed the show live,
Sure.
yeah, we can do that, and I will put all your information on the Strange Oddities Facebook page, as well as the YouTube link will be available for anybody to download and watch it anytime at their own convenience. Whichever time of the day or weekend you want to, anytime come on the Strange Oddities podcast and just watch the show over again. You're more than welcome to. And I'll give you the link as well to the YouTube channel, where you can post it on whatever you would like to share it with.
Thank you.
Yeah. So everybody, I hope enjoyed our guest this evening. We are very humbled. Strange Oddities podcast is extremely excited and thankful to have Miss Shelley Binder as a guest tonight here on the show. Um, I hope everybody enjoyed her stories. They're true stories about her family and the research that she's done. As you can hear, the detailed information that she shared with everybody tonight, of how much passion and um, just I admire. I commend you for and admire the research that you have done on your family and all that stuff you've shared with us tonight. It's amazing. I'm at a loss for words, and that
Yeah.
doesn't happen often because I'm a chatterbox.
Well, as you can see, me too. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope I was a good host.
yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you don't mind, stay on. Don't hang up with me. We'll say our goodbyes privately. I'm
Okay.
gonna, yeah, I'm gonna, share information with upcoming guests, for our Strange Oddities podcast viewers and listeners. So I'm gonna minimize you, and don't worry, I'm not hanging up on you.
Okay.
All
Got
right,
All
great.
right.
Yep. All right, guys, that was Shelley Binder on the Strange Oddities podcast tonight. Again, apologies to my viewers and listeners of Facebook. So hopefully, I'll be out of Facebook jail in the next 24 hours, and I'll be able to repost all this stuff. So lesson learned. I know what to do or not to do now. So anyway, long story short, we enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, please email me. Give me feedback. I love feedback, good or bad. I'd love to hear all your input about the Strange Oddities podcast guests and topics that we pick every week. If you haven't subscribed, guys, as always, subscribe to the YouTube channel whenever you can. And yeah, there she is in the chat. So I'm excited because I'm a fan of the Titanic, and my wife is, and there's a lot of people that are into the history of it. Not just like the movie. We talked a lot of detailed information about the stuff on the ship, the people, the history of it, and which is there was a lot of prominent people and figures that people don't know about, and I'm glad she shared a lot of that with our viewers. So I hope everybody learned a little something. I know I did. So we're gonna end this here, guys. I am gonna have a really amazing guest the following week. Um, I will announce that. Going to confirm with them before I go ahead and make that announcement. But I'm going to have another descendant of a different topic, the Wild West, the OK Corral, the famous shooting out west. I'm going to have a descendant of the Wyatt Earps family. The great lawmen that big famous battle that took place by the OK Corral. So I'm going to have a descendant of Wyatt Earp on the show. His name is James Earp, and I'm hoping to confirm with him and set that up for next week. So if I do, you get that announcement on the Facebook page once that's up and running again, and you get all the information about him on the Strange Oddities podcast Facebook. So guys, have a great night. Be well, everybody. God bless everyone, and be well. I'm going to play our video here, and have a great night, everybody.